Get on your knees and clean it up, you filthy parasite. Richard Sterling roared as the toe of his Italian leather shoe slammed into my ribs, sending a jolt of agony through my side. I collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the Sterling mansion, clutching my abdomen while gasping for air. The reason for this brutality was a single drop of oatmeal that had fallen from the feeding tube onto his pristine suit trousers. He looked down at me with eyes devoid of humanity, seeing only a liability that was costing him money. I bit my lip until I tasted the copper tang of blood, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a scream. Any other woman would have packed her bags and fled this golden cage months ago, but I could not leave. Not yet. Not while Arthur Sterling, the paralyzed man in the wheelchair next to us, was still breathing. That old man was the only person alive who knew the encryption keys to the Swiss bank accounts that held the $50 million his company had stolen from my father years ago, driving him to suicide. I was not just a battered wife. I was a hunter, waiting for my prey to expose his throat, and today Richard had just made a fatal mistake. My silence only seemed to fuel his rage as he grabbed a handful of my hair, yanking my head back, so I was forced to look up at him. His handsome face was twisted into a sneer that revealed the monster beneath the CEO mask. "You are useless, Elena." He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You cannot even feed a vegetable without making a mess. You are lucky I let you live here instead of the gutter where I found you." He released me with a shove, causing my head to crack against the leg of the mahogany table. My vision blurred for a second, but I focused on the wheel of Arthur's chair. I saw the old man's finger twitch just a fraction of an inch. He was awake. He was watching. He was locked inside his own body, fully conscious of the abuse his son was inflicting on the woman who kept him alive. That twitch was my signal. It meant the medication protocol I had secretly started 3 months ago was working. The paralysis was reversing. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open, and the clicking of high heels on marble announced a new arrival. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The overpowering scent of expensive Chanel perfume filled the room, choking out the smell of antiseptic and fear. Jessica Vance walked in like she owned the place, her eyes scanning the scene with amusement rather than shock. She was the director of public relations for Sterling Corp and Richard's mistress for the past 2 years. She stepped over my prone body as if I were a rug. "Richard, darling, you really must get better help," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "This one looks like she belongs in a homeless shelter, not a Hamptons estate." She placed a manicured hand on Richard's chest, calming the beast with a touch. Richard sighed and adjusted his cuffs, stepping away from me. "She has not helped Jessica. She is my wife, technically, though hopefully not for much longer." Jessica laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like broken glass. She poured herself a glass of red wine from the decanter on the table and walked over to where I was struggling to sit up. She tilted the glass and watched with a cruel smile as the dark red liquid cascaded down onto my white nurse uniform, staining it like fresh blood. "Oops," she said without a hint of apology. My hand slipped. "You look better this way, Elena. The red hides the dirt of your poverty." I stared at the wine soaking into the fabric, feeling the cold wetness seep against my skin. In the eyes of the law and high society, I was just a gold digger who had trapped the Sterling heir into a marriage he did not want. They thought I was weak. They thought I was trapped by my lack of money and connections. They did not know that the woman on the floor was a former top trauma nurse who knew exactly how to dismantle a human body using nothing but pressure points and pharmacology. "Get up," Richard commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "Clean yourself up and bring the medical kit to the study. We have business to discuss regarding my father." I watched them walk away arm in arm, leaving me on the floor with the paralyzed patriarch. I used the table to pull myself up, my ribs throbbing with every movement. I wiped the blood from my lip and looked at Arthur. His eyes were wide, filled with panic. He knew what was coming. I squeezed his hand briefly, a silent promise that I would not let them win. "I am sorry, Arthur," I whispered. but we have to play their game a little longer. I went to the medical cabinet and prepared the tray, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I grabbed the vials Richard had requested earlier, along with a few others he would not recognize. The study was dark lit only by the glow of the fireplace. Richard was sitting behind his father's massive desk looking every bit the king of a kingdom he did not earn. Jessica was perched on the edge of the desk, swinging her legs. When I entered, Richard threw a file onto the desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of me. "Read it," he said. I picked it up. It was a financial report. "Sterling Corp is hemorrhaging money, Elena. The board is voting tomorrow on a hostile takeover. If I do not have full control of the family trust by 9 in the morning, I lose everything. I lose the company. I lose the house. And you lose the roof over your head." I looked up at him, feigning confusion. "I do not understand, Richard. What do you want me to do?" He stood up and walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. He picked up a vial of morphine from the tray I had brought. "I want you to be a good nurse," he said, his voice soft but terrifying. "My father is suffering. Look at him. He is a prisoner in his own flesh. It is cruel to keep him alive. I want you to give him peace." He pressed the vial into my hand. "A triple dose. It will look like respiratory failure, a natural complication of his condition. No autopsy, no questions, just peace." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was asking me to murder his father so he could inherit the trust fund before the board meeting. It was not euthanasia. It was an execution for profit. I pulled my hand back, dropping the vial back onto the tray. "I cannot do that, Richard. That is murder. I will lose my license. I will go to prison." Jessica hopped off the desk and circled me like a shark. "You really do not get it, do you, sweetie?" she sneered. "You think you have a choice?" Richard pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked a button. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed a grainy video of me from 2 weeks ago. In the video, I was aggressively moving Arthur's limbs, doing physical therapy, but the angle and the editing made it look like I was twisting his arms, hurting him. Richard smiled. "I have hours of footage like this, edited to look like elder abuse. If you do not do what I say, I will send this to the police. You will not just lose your license, Elena. You will go to federal prison for torturing a helpless billionaire. You will be branded a monster. No one will ever believe the word of a gold-digging nurse over the CEO of Sterling Corp." I stared at the screen, feeling the trap snap shut. He had been planning this for months. He had set me up. The anger inside me flared hot and bright, but I forced it down, burying it under layers of cold calculation. If I refused, he would destroy me, and Arthur would die anyway at the hands of someone else. If I agreed, I became an accomplice, but if I played along, I could buy time. I looked at the vial of morphine, then at Richard. "You promise I will be safe?" I asked, my voice trembling with fake fear. "You promise the police will not know?" Richard smirked triumphantly. "Of course, darling. I protect my assets. Just do it. Now." I nodded slowly, picking up the syringe. I drew the clear liquid from the vial, my movements precise. Richard and Jessica watched me like vultures waiting for a carcass. I turned to Arthur, who had been wheeled into the room by Richard earlier. The old man's eyes were terrified, screaming silently. I leaned down close to his ear, blocking their view with my body. "Trust me," I breathed so faintly that only he could hear. My hand moved with lightning speed. Sleight of hand was a skill I had picked up in the emergency room to distract children during painful procedures. I palmed the morphine syringe and swapped it with the one I had prepared in my pocket. A syringe filled with harmless saline solution and a mild sedative to simulate a coma. I injected the saline into his IV line. I watched the fluid enter his vein, knowing that to Richard and Jessica, it looked like death. I stood up and stepped back. "It is done," I said, my voice flat. Arthur's eyes fluttered closed, the sedative taking effect. His breathing slowed. Richard checked the monitor, seeing the heart rate drop. "Perfect," he whispered. He pulled out his phone. "I will call the family doctor. He is on my payroll. He will certify the time of death." Jessica clapped her hands in delight. "Finally. We can sell the Hamptons house and get that penthouse in Manhattan." Richard turned to me, his face changing instantly from conspiratorial to dismissive. "You served your purpose, Elena. Now get out." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it at my feet. "Divorce papers," he said. "Signed and notarized. And since you just violated the morality clause of our prenuptial agreement by committing a felony, I am annulling any financial support. You get nothing. Not a dime." Jessica laughed, kicking the envelope toward me. "Did you really think he would stay with a murderer? You are a liability now, Elena. If you ever try to blackmail us, we will release the abuse tape. You are trapped." I looked at the papers on the floor, then at the man I had called my husband. He had used me to kill his father, or so he thought, and now he was discarding me like medical waste. The betrayal was absolute. It was naked and ugly. But deep inside, a cold satisfaction was spreading. He thought he had won. He thought Arthur was dying. He did not know that by tomorrow morning Arthur would wake up. And he certainly did not know about the document in my locker at the hospital, a medical proxy power of attorney that Arthur had signed 3 months ago, giving me and only me absolute control over his life and his assets. Richard had just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder in front of a witness who held the power to destroy him. I bent down and picked up the papers. I did not cry. I did not beg. I stood up straight, ignoring the pain in my ribs. I looked Richard dead in the eye. "You are right, Richard." I said, my voice steady and cold. "I am leaving. But you should enjoy this victory while it lasts. Because dead men tell no tales, but living ones have a lot to say." Richard frowned, confused by my change in tone. "Get out before I have security throw you out," he barked. I walked to the door, clutching the papers. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. I was alone. I was homeless. I had $0 in my bank account. But as I looked back at the mansion looming in the darkness, I smiled. They thought they had cast out a helpless victim. They had no idea they had just unleashed the executioner. The game had just begun, and I held the ace of spades. The biting cold of the unheated gardening shed seeped into my bones, waking me from a fitful sleep that was more like passing out from exhaustion. My ribs throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of Richard's expensive shoe connecting with my torso the night before. I had nowhere else to go. My bank cards were frozen, my phone was smashed, and the nearest town was a 10-mile walk through the pitch-black Hamptons roads. I had huddled under a pile of burlap sacks smelling of fertilizer and gasoline, waiting for the sun to rise. I needed to stay close. I needed to be here when the family lawyer arrived for the board meeting preparation. The sound of the shed door rattling open made me flinch. Light flooded in, blinding me momentarily. A silhouette blocked the exit. It was Richard, looking impeccable in a fresh navy suit, holding a steaming cup of coffee that smelled like heaven and cruelty. "You look like a rat nesting in the trash," he sneered, taking a sip of his coffee while I shivered on the dirt floor. "I thought you would have crawled back to the gutter by now. But since you are still trespassing on my property, you can make yourself useful. The catering staff is short one server for the charity gala this afternoon. Work the shift and I might give you enough cash for a bus ticket out of here. Refuse and I call the cops to report a vagrant breaking and entering." I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off my ruined nurse uniform. He wanted to squeeze one last drop of humiliation out of me before discarding me completely. He wanted his wealthy friends and business partners to see Elena Rossi, the woman who once sat at the dinner table, now serving them champagne like a servant. It was a twisted power play, a final assertion of dominance. I looked him in the eye and nodded my face a mask of defeat. "I will do it," I said, my voice raspy from dehydration. "Good," he replied, turning his back on me. "Go to the service entrance and try to wash that smell off. You reek of poverty." I watched him walk away towards the main house, his stride confident and arrogant. He thought he was breaking me. He did not know he was giving me exactly what I needed: access to the main hall where the confrontation would happen. The Sterling estate was transformed into a playground for the elite. White tents dotted the manicured lawn, and a string quartet played soft classical music that drifted through the open French doors. Inside, the ballroom was filled with New York's power players, hedge fund managers, politicians, and socialites dripping in diamonds. I wore a stiff black maid's uniform that smelled of starch and someone else's sweat. My job was to circulate with a tray of crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. Every step sent a spike of pain through my side, but I kept my back straight. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible to the people I had dined with just a week ago. They looked right through me, their eyes sliding over the help without a flicker of recognition. Until Jessica saw me. She was standing near the center of the room, holding court in a shimmering red dress that clung to her body like a second skin. Her hand was draped possessively over Richard's arm. When her eyes landed on me, a wicked smile spread across her face. She whispered something to the group of socialites around her, and they all turned to look at me, giggling behind their manicured hands. Jessica beckoned me over with a snap of her fingers as if calling a dog. "You there?" she called out, her voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. "We need more drinks here. Chop chop." I walked over, keeping my head down, my grip tightening on the silver tray. As I approached, Jessica extended her foot just an inch. It was subtle, calculated, and unavoidable. My boot caught on her heel. I pitched forward. The tray tipped. A dozen glasses of expensive champagne crashed onto the polished floor, shattering into a million sparkling shards. The sound silenced the room instantly. Cold liquid splashed onto the hem of Jessica's red dress and onto the shoes of a senator standing nearby. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a heavy, judgmental silence. Jessica shrieked, jumping back dramatically. "You clumsy idiot!" She screamed, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Look what you did. This dress cost more than your entire life." She turned to the crowd, playing the victim perfectly. "This is what happens when you try to give charity cases a job. They just ruin everything." Richard stepped forward, his face contorted with feigned outrage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the bruise he had left yesterday. "I gave you a chance, Elena," he announced to the room, his voice booming with authority. "I tried to help you get back on your feet after the divorce, and this is how you repay me. By embarrassing my family in front of our esteemed guests. Get out. You are fired. Security. Get this trash out of my sight." Two burly security guards in dark suits started marching towards me from the perimeter of the room. The guests watched with a mixture of disgust and amusement, glad to have some drama to spice up their afternoon. I looked at Richard, then at Jessica. They were glowing with triumph. They had successfully framed the narrative. To the world, I was the incompetent, bitter ex-wife being justly removed. But then the heavy double doors at the entrance swung open with a loud thud. A deep, authoritative voice boomed across the silent ballroom. "Unhand her." Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Henderson, the Sterling family's chief attorney, a man who had served Arthur Sterling for 40 years. Behind him were not the local police, but 4 federal marshals and a team of private security contractors. Richard laughed nervously, releasing my arm. "Mr. Henderson, you are just in time. We were just removing a trespasser. Please have your men escort this woman off the premises. She is mentally unstable." Mr. Henderson walked into the room, ignoring Richard completely. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that sent a shockwave through the room. "I am sorry I am late." "Mrs. Sterling," he said to me, his voice clear and respectful. "The traffic from the city was terrible." He then turned to the security guards who were about to grab me. "If you touch her, I will have you arrested for assault on the owner of this estate." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Richard's face went pale. "What are you talking about, Henderson?" "I am the owner. My father is incapacitated. I have the power of attorney." Mr. Henderson opened his briefcase and pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the state of New York. "Actually, Richard, you do not," he said calmly. "3 months ago, Mr. Arthur Sterling revoked your power of attorney, citing incompetence and moral turpitude. He executed a new durable power of attorney and a medical proxy." He held up the document for everyone to see. Everything the company, the estate, the bank accounts, and the medical decisions regarding his care now belongs to the sole guardian named in this document, Mrs. Elena Rossi Sterling. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard stared at the paper as if it were a bomb. "That is a lie," he stammered. "My father is a vegetable. He cannot sign anything. That is a forgery. Elena forged it. She is a nurse, she knows how to fake these things." Mr. Henderson shook his head. "The signing was witnessed by myself, 2 independent judges, and recorded on video. It is ironclad, Richard. And regarding your father's condition, Mrs. Sterling has just informed me that there was an attempt on his life last night. An overdose of morphine administered under duress." Jessica tried to sneak away towards the exit, but one of the federal marshals stepped in her path, blocking her escape. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Fortunately, Mrs. Sterling had the foresight to swap the medication. Arthur Sterling is very much alive, Richard, and he is currently awake in the master bedroom watching this entire event via the security cameras. He has instructed me to terminate your employment as CEO effective immediately. You are being removed from the board for gross misconduct and attempted patricide." I stepped forward, the broken glass crunching under my boots. I looked at Richard, who was now trembling, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only fear. I looked at Jessica, who was trapped against the wall like a cornered rat. Then I looked at the crowd of socialites who were now staring at me with fear and awe. I reached up and untied the apron of the maid uniform, letting it fall to the floor. I smoothed out my dress and lifted my chin. "Security," I said, my voice steady and commanding, echoing the tone Richard had used on me moments ago. "Please escort these trespassers off my property and check their pockets. I do not want them stealing any of the silverware on their way out." Richard lunged at me, his face purple with rage. "You bitch, I will kill you," he screamed. But before he could get within 5 feet of me, the private security team intercepted him, slamming him face first onto the polished floor. The impact made a sickening thud that resonated through the silent room. Jessica screamed as she was handcuffed by the marshals. I stood over Richard, looking down at his pathetic form. "You wanted me to clean up, Richard," I said softly, so only he could hear. "I just did. I cleaned the trash out of my house." The sight of Richard Sterling being dragged across the marble floor of his own ballroom was an image that would be burned into the retinas of New York high society for decades. He kicked and thrashed against the grip of the private security contractors, his expensive suit jacket tearing at the shoulder seam with a sound like ripping canvas. His threats of lawsuits and physical violence echoed off the vaulted ceiling, but they were empty noises now stripped of the power that usually backed them. Jessica Vance was less dignified. She wept openly, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets, as she begged the federal marshals to let her retrieve her purse, which likely contained the corporate credit cards she had been abusing for years. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching the removal of the cancerous cells that had infected this house for too long. The guests who just minutes ago had been laughing at my clumsiness now looked at me with a mixture of terror and calculation. They were sharks, and they realized a new apex predator had just entered the water. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward the elevator. The party was over, and the real work was about to begin. The master bedroom was dimly lit by the medical equipment that hummed rhythmically in the corner. Arthur Sterling lay in the center of the massive bed, his body frail and wasted, but his eyes were sharp and alert. For 3 years he had been a prisoner in his own skull, unable to move or speak, while his son pilfered his empire. I approached the bed and sat in the chair I had occupied for countless nights as a nurse, but tonight I sat as a partner. I reached out and took his cold hand. "We did it, Arthur." I whispered, my voice steady. "The cancer has been excised." The old man blinked once for yes. His gaze shifted to the bedside table where a biometric safe sat. I knew what to do. I pressed his thumb against the scanner and the heavy steel lid clicked open. Inside was not money or jewels, but a simple black tablet and a flash drive. This was the dead man's switch Arthur had prepared years ago. It contained the dirty secrets of every member of the board of directors. It was the weapon I would need for tomorrow morning. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the glass facade of Sterling Tower. I stepped out of the black town car flanked by 2 bodyguards Mr. Henderson had hired for me. I was no longer wearing the nurse's uniform or the maid's dress. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my father's annual salary, sharp enough to cut glass. I walked through the lobby, ignoring the whispers of the receptionists and the security guards who had once blocked my entry. Today they held the doors open, their eyes lowered in deference. I took the private elevator to the top floor where the emergency board meeting was already in session. The air in the boardroom was thick with cigar smoke and testosterone. 12 men in expensive suits sat around the long mahogany table. They were the titans of industry, the gatekeepers of the Sterling Empire, and they looked at me as if I were a cockroach that had crawled onto their dinner plate. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board, a man whose smile was as cold as a reptilian's. He did not stand up when I entered. He simply gestured to a chair in the corner away from the table. "You can sit there. Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are discussing serious business. We will call you if we need someone to check Mr. Sterling's blood pressure." A few of the other board members chuckled low and nasty. They thought this was a joke. They thought the medical proxy was just a piece of paper that gave me control over ventilators and feeding tubes, not their multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. They were about to learn a very painful lesson in corporate law. I walked past the chair in the corner. I walked straight to the head of the table where Marcus Thorne was sitting. I stood over him, placing my leather portfolio on the table with a heavy thud. "You are in my seat, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. The room went silent. Thorne's face flushed a deep, angry red. He stood up, looming over me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Listen to me, you little gold digger," he hissed. "We are currently drafting a motion to invalidate your proxy on the grounds of mental incompetence. We know you are just a nurse. You do not know the difference between a balance sheet and a bedpan. You have zero authority here. Security, remove this woman." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished wood toward him. It was a forensic accounting report detailing the unauthorized transfer of $12 million from the company pension fund into a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account registered to Marcus Thorne. The color drained from his face instantly, leaving him looking like a gray corpse. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I may have changed bedpans, Mr. Thorne, but I also know how to spot a parasite. You have been siphoning money from this company for 5 years. I have the bank records. I have the wire transfers. And I have the federal indictment drafted and ready to file with the SEC. Thorne slumped back into his chair, his legs giving way. The other board members exchanged nervous glances, shifting in their seats like schoolboys caught cheating. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each of them. Mr. Galloway, I have the photos of you with the underage girls in Thailand. Mr. Stein, I have the proof of your insider trading on the TechCore merger. I tapped the black tablet on the table. Arthur Sterling saw everything. He knew everything. And now I know everything. You have two choices, gentlemen. You can recognize my authority as the acting CEO and voting proxy for the Sterling majority shares. Or we can turn this meeting into a criminal investigation. The choice is yours. One by one, the hands went up. It was a unanimous vote. The fear in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. They were not loyal to me. They were loyal to their own survival. I sat down in the chairman's seat, the leather still warm from Thorne's body. I looked at the terrified faces around me. Good decision, I said. First order of business. We are freezing all assets of Richard Sterling and Jessica Vance. I want a full forensic audit of the marketing department. And Mr. Thorne, you are resigning for personal health reasons effective immediately. Get out. Thorne scrambled to gather his papers, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his pen. He fled the room without a backward glance. I spent the next 6 hours dismantling Richard's legacy. I fired his cronies. I canceled his vanity projects. I reallocated funds to secure the company's stability. By the time the meeting adjourned, my head was pounding, but my position was secure. I was no longer just a figurehead. I was the iron hand of the Sterling Empire. Mr. Henderson walked in as the last board member scurried out. He looked impressed. You handled them better than Arthur ever did, he said, with a rare smile. But we have a problem. He placed his phone on the table. It was a news alert. Richard Sterling had been released on bail just an hour ago. His mother, a recluse who lived in Paris and hated Arthur, had posted the $5 million bond. But that was not the worst part. The headline on the screen made my blood run cold. Sterling heir accuses nurse wife of poisoning father. Claims medical proxy was coerced under drugged state. Richard was not just fighting back legally, he was launching a public smear campaign. And he had a powerful ally I had not anticipated. His mother, Victoria Sterling, the Iron Lady of European fashion, was coming to New York. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it and a chill went down my spine. It was a photo of the gardening shed where I had slept the night before. The caption read simply, "You should have stayed in the dirt." I realized then that Richard was not acting alone. Someone was watching me. Someone knew my movements. The victory in the boardroom felt suddenly fragile. I walked to the window and looked down at the city streets below. Somewhere out there, Richard was plotting his next move, and now he had his mother's billions backing him. I turned to Henderson. Lock down the hospital wing at the estate. Hire more security. And find out everything you can about Victoria Sterling. If she wants a war, she is going to get one. The 60-inch OLED screen in the penthouse office broadcasted my destruction in high definition. Richard Sterling sat on the plush beige couch of the morning show, his eyes red-rimmed and glistening with carefully practiced tears. The host, a woman known for destroying careers with a single interview, leaned in with sympathetic concern. Richard wiped his nose with a silk handkerchief. "I just want my father back." He sobbed, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. "She isolated him. She drugged him. I tried to save him, but she has this legal document. She is a nurse. She knows how to manipulate the system. I am terrified she is going to finish the job before the courts can intervene." The host turned to the camera, her face hardening. "You heard it here first, America. A billionaire held hostage in his own home by a woman labeled the Black Widow of the Hamptons. We have reached out to Elena Sterling for comment but have received no response, which speaks volumes." I muted the television, my hand gripping the remote until the plastic creaked. Outside the window down on Fifth Avenue, a crowd had already gathered. They held signs that read, "Justice for Arthur and Nurse Ratched." The public court of opinion had convened, and I had been found guilty in absentia. Mr. Henderson stood by the window looking down at the mob with a grim expression. "This is a coordinated attack, Elena," he said, his voice grave. "Richard could not organize a bake sale, let alone a national media blitz. This has Victoria Sterling written all over it. She is weaponizing the narrative. If the public pressure gets too high, the district attorney might feel compelled to intervene and suspend your guardianship pending an investigation. That is exactly what they want." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my suit. I knew Victoria Sterling by reputation only. She was a woman who had survived 3 divorces and 4 hostile takeovers. She lived in Paris because New York bored her, but she still pulled the strings of the family empire from across the ocean. I expected her to send lawyers. I did not expect the convoy of black Escalades that pulled up to the main entrance of the estate an hour later. I watched via the security feed as the lead car door opened. A woman in her 60s stepped out looking like she had just stepped off a runway. She wore vintage Dior oversized sunglasses and a look of absolute disdain as she surveyed the grounds. She did not ring the doorbell. She simply walked in, followed by a phalanx of assistants and bodyguards. I met her in the grand foyer. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, blocking her path to Arthur's room. Victoria stopped 10 feet away and lowered her sunglasses, looking me up and down like I was a piece of furniture she intended to return. "So this is the creature that has burrowed into my family," she said, her voice cool and devoid of emotion. "You are prettier than the mugshot Richard showed me, but I can still smell the desperation on you. It is a distinctive scent, my dear, like cheap perfume trying to mask the stench of a sewer." I kept my face impassive, refusing to let her see the anger simmering beneath my skin. "I am the legal owner of this estate, Mrs. Sterling," I replied, my tone matching hers in coldness. "And you are trespassing. Unless you are here to visit your ex-husband whom you have not seen in 5 years, I suggest you leave." Victoria laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Legal ownership is such a fluid concept when one has the right resources. I am not here to visit that old fool Arthur. I am here to make a transaction." She snapped her fingers and an assistant placed a silver briefcase on the table next to a vase of white lilies. Victoria opened the case. Inside were stacks of cash and a cashier's check. $5 million, she stated flatly. Tax-free. Enough to disappear. Enough to buy a new identity, a new face, and a life far away from here. "Take it, sign the annulment papers, and walk out that door. If you do this, I will call off the dogs. The media will find a new story. Richard will drop the charges. You can go back to being a nobody." I looked at the money. It was more than I could earn in 10 lifetimes as a nurse. It was tempting, but it was also a trap. Taking the money would be an admission of guilt. It would prove I was just the gold digger they claimed I was. I closed the briefcase with a loud snap. "I am not for sale, Victoria," I said, "and neither is your son's dignity, although I doubt it is worth $5 million. I am staying." Victoria sighed, closing her eyes briefly as if dealing with a stubborn child. "I was afraid you would say that. Pity. I prefer the carrot, but I am quite proficient with the stick." She pulled a manila envelope from her designer handbag. She tapped it against her palm. "Do you know what my private investigators found when they dug into your past, Elena? They found a very interesting discrepancy." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. "Your nursing license," she whispered. "It is under the name Elena Rossi. But your birth certificate, the one from the small town in Ohio where your father went bankrupt and blew his brains out, that says Elena Russo. You changed one letter. Just one little vowel to hide your connection to the man my husband destroyed." She smiled a cruel, predatory smile. "That is fraud, my dear. You falsified your application to nursing school. You falsified your background check to get this job, which means your medical license is invalid. And if your license is invalid, your medical proxy is void. You are not a guardian, Elena. You are a fraud practicing medicine without a license. That is a felony that carries a 10-year sentence. The blood drained from my face. It was the one secret I had buried deep. I had changed my name legally, but I had failed to disclose the name change on my medical board application because I knew the Sterling name would trigger a rejection. It was a technicality, but in the hands of Victoria Sterling, it was a nuclear weapon. She saw the fear in my eyes and her smile widened. "You have 24 hours," she said. "Take the money and leave, or I hand this file to the district attorney. You will not just lose the house. You will lose your freedom. You will rot in a cell while Richard spends your father's money." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the marble, leaving me standing alone in the foyer with the briefcase and the threat hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. I felt nausea rise in my throat. She had me. If I stayed, she would destroy me legally. If I left, I lost everything I had fought for. I looked up the stairs toward Arthur's room. He was the only leverage I had left. But how could a paralyzed man save me from a shark like Victoria? My phone buzzed again. It was Richard. The text was simple. A link to a live stream. I clicked it. Richard was standing on the steps of the courthouse surrounded by reporters. "We have received new information," he announced into the microphones, his voice strong and confident. "We have reason to believe that the woman posing as my wife is actually the daughter of a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. This was never about love. This was a long con, a vendetta, and we will prove it." The screen went black. They were moving faster than the 24-hour deadline. They were accelerating the timeline to force me into a panic. I needed to think. I needed a countermove that didn't involve running away. I grabbed the silver briefcase and marched into the kitchen. I dumped the cash into the industrial sink and turned on the garbage disposal. The sound of money being shredded was loud and violent. I filmed it with my phone. Then I walked to the fireplace in the living room and threw the cashier's check into the flames. I filmed that too. I opened my social media app, the one Jessica had mocked me for having. I uploaded the videos with a simple caption: "I do not want your money. I want justice." Then I called Mr. Henderson. "Get the car ready." I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline but firm. "We are not going to hide. We are going to the hospital. Victoria wants to talk about my medical credentials. Fine. Let's show the world what kind of nurse I really am." I ran upstairs to Arthur's room. I needed him to do the impossible. I needed him to move. Not just a finger, but enough to prove he was cognizant. Enough to prove that my care, despite the license technicality, had saved his life. I disconnected his IV lines. I dressed him in a suit. I strapped him into his wheelchair. Arthur looked at me with question in his eyes. "We are going for a ride," I told him. "It is time for you to meet the press." We exited the mansion through the service tunnels, avoiding the reporters at the front gate. Mr. Henderson was waiting with the car. We sped toward the city, toward the television studio where Richard had given his interview that morning. I was going to crash the news cycle. I was going to gamble everything on one live appearance. As we crossed the bridge into Manhattan, a police siren wailed behind us. Blue and red lights flashed in the rearview mirror. Mr. Henderson cursed. "It is an intercept. They must have tracked us." I looked back. It wasn't just a traffic stop. 3 police cruisers were boxing us in. Victoria wasn't waiting 24 hours. She had called in her favors. She was having me arrested before I could reach the studio. I looked at Arthur. He was my only witness, and now he was about to be taken back into their custody. I grabbed the wheel from Henderson. "Hold on," I shouted. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, swerving across 3 lanes of traffic. The car skidded the tires, screaming in protest. We were not stopping. If I stopped, I died. This was no longer a legal battle. It was a chase. and I was driving for my life. The engine of the black sedan roared like a wounded beast as I swerved across the double yellow lines of 6th Avenue, narrowly missing a delivery truck that blared its horn in protest. Mr. Henderson was gripping the dashboard with white knuckles, his face a mask of sheer terror as the sirens behind us grew louder and more insistent. I could see the flashing lights reflecting off the glass skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan, turning the canyon of steel and concrete into a strobe-lit nightmare. We were 3 blocks away from the network studios where Richard had delivered his tearful performance just hours ago. If I stopped now, the police would drag me out. Arthur would be returned to the care of his murderers, and I would disappear into the prison system before sunset. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Arthur was strapped tightly into the back seat, his eyes wide, but surprisingly calm. He knew the stakes. He knew that this terrifying ride was his only path to freedom. Pull over, the loudspeaker from the lead police cruiser boomed, cutting through the city noise. Pull over immediately or we will use force. I ignored the command, slamming my foot harder onto the accelerator. I am sorry, Arthur, I shouted over the roar of the engine. Hold on tight. I saw a gap in the traffic, a narrow alleyway between 2 news vans parked in front of the studio entrance. It was a suicide run, but it was my only shot. I yanked the steering wheel to the right. The car mounted the curb with a violent jolt that rattled my teeth. The undercarriage scraped against the concrete, sending a shower of sparks flying behind us. Pedestrians screamed and scattered, diving out of the way, as our vehicle skidded to a halt just inches from the revolving glass doors of the media center. Before the wheels had even stopped spinning, I kicked my door open. "Get the wheelchair!" I screamed at Henderson, who was hyperventilating in the passenger seat. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made everything move in slow motion. I scrambled out and threw open the back door. Arthur was shaken but unharmed. I unbuckled him with trembling hands, my fingers fumbling with the straps. Behind us, the police cruisers screeched to a halt, blocking the street. Doors flew open, and 6 officers emerged, their weapons drawn and pointed directly at my chest. "Freeze. Put your hands in the air. Step away from the hostage." I did not freeze. I grabbed Arthur under his arms and hauled him out of the car. Henderson had managed to retrieve the wheelchair from the trunk and snapped it open on the sidewalk. We dumped Arthur into it just as the first officer rushed forward. "Do not shoot," I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. "He is not a hostage. He is my witness." The commotion had attracted the attention of the news crews stationed outside. Cameras that had been waiting for a glimpse of a celebrity suddenly swung toward us, capturing the chaotic scene live. This was it. The court of public opinion was now in session. "Step away from Mr. Sterling now, ma'am," the lead officer shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger of his service weapon. "You are under arrest for kidnapping and fraud." I stood behind the wheelchair, using Arthur as a human shield, not against bullets, but against the narrative they were trying to spin. I gripped the handles of his chair and pushed him forward, right into the circle of cameras. "Look at him," I yelled at the reporters, my voice amplified by the boom mics that dipped toward us. "Look at the man Richard Sterling claims is a vegetable. Does he look like he is dying? Does he look like he is being abused?" The crowd of onlookers grew larger, forming a tight ring around us and the police. The officers hesitated, unsure how to handle a standoff that was being broadcast to millions. Then, a black SUV tore through the police barricade, forcing the officers to jump back. The door opened and Victoria Sterling stepped out. She did not look rattled. She looked furious. Her composure was gone, replaced by the cold rage of a matriarch whose authority had been challenged. "Arrest her," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She is a fraud. Her name is Elena Russo. She faked her credentials. She is a criminal who endangered my husband's life." I looked straight into the lens of the nearest camera. "She is right," I declared, my voice steadying. "My name is Elena Russo. I am the daughter of Frank Russo, the man who built the technology that made this family billions before they stole it and drove him to his grave. A murmur went through the crowd. I admitted it. I owned the lie. Yes, I changed my name, because if I had applied as Elena Russo, I would never have been allowed within 100 feet of this building. I lied to get in the door. I lied to become a nurse here. But I did not lie about saving his life. Victoria marched forward, her eyes blazing. She is deranged. Officer, take her down. She is putting him in danger. The police moved in, closing the circle. 2 officers grabbed my arms, wrenching them behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulders as the handcuffs clicked shut. Arthur sat there motionless, his head lolling slightly to the side. It looked like I had failed. It looked like Richard and Victoria had won. They had the law. They had the money. And now they had me in chains. But then a sound cut through the noise of the crowd. It was a low, guttural noise, like a rusty gate being forced open. Everyone froze. The officers holding me loosened their grip slightly. The sound came again, louder this time, forming a jagged syllable. No, it was Arthur. His hand, which had been resting on the armrest of his wheelchair, lifted slowly. It trembled violently, fighting against years of atrophy and the lingering effects of the sedatives. But it rose. He pointed a shaking finger not at me, but at Victoria. Let her go, Arthur rasped. The words were slurred, distorted by his stroke, but they were unmistakable. He turned his head slowly, painfully, until his eyes locked with the lead police officer. She saved me. The silence that followed was absolute. The reporters were stunned. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her perfect facade cracking for the first time. The man she claimed was a vegetable had just spoken in defense of his alleged kidnapper. The police officer looked from Arthur to me, then to Victoria. He holstered his weapon. "Ma'am," he said to Victoria, his tone shifting from subservient to suspicious. "It appears Mr. Sterling is lucid and capable of making his own decisions, and he is instructing us to release his guardian." Victoria's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "This is a trick," she hissed. "She doped him up with stimulants. This is medical manipulation." But the cameras were rolling. The world had seen it. The narrative of the helpless victim had just been shattered by the victim himself. The officer unlocked the handcuffs. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back into my hands. I walked around the wheelchair and placed my hand on Arthur's shoulder. He looked up at me, and for a brief second I saw a ghost of a smile on his face. We were not safe yet, but we had survived the ambush. I looked at Victoria. "You should leave, Mrs. Sterling," I said quietly, "before the press starts asking why you tried to bribe me $5 million to let your son kill his father." Victoria glared at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat radiating from her skin. She smoothed her coat, regained her composure, and leaned in close so only I could hear. "You won the battle, little girl," she whispered. "But you have no idea what war looks like. You admitted to fraud on live television. The nursing board will revoke your license by tomorrow morning. Without a license, you cannot be a medical guardian. And once you lose that status, I will bury you so deep not even your father's ghost will find you." She turned and swept into her SUV, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with a victory that tasted suspiciously like ash. As the ambulance arrived to check Arthur, I realized she was right. I had proven Arthur was alive, but I had also handed them the weapon to destroy my legal standing. I was a hero to the public, but legally I was now a confessed felon with a suspended license. The medical proxy required a licensed medical professional to oversee his care. If I lost my license, I lost Arthur. And if I lost Arthur, I lost the only shield I had against their vengeance. I looked at Mr. Henderson. He was on his phone, his face pale. "Elena," he said, his voice shaking. "The state nursing board just issued an emergency suspension order. They are coming for the proxy." We have less than 12 hours before they transfer Arthur to a state facility. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate were bolted shut, but they could not block out the noise of the news helicopters hovering overhead. The blades chopped the air with a rhythmic thumping sound that vibrated through the walls of the library where I was pacing back and forth. It felt like a siege. Outside the wrought iron gates, a swarm of reporters and curious onlookers had set up camp, turning our driveway into a circus. Inside, the air was thick with impending doom. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, marking the seconds of the 12-hour grace period the state nursing board had granted before they formally revoked my license and transferred Arthur to a state-run facility. 12 hours. That was all the time I had to find a loophole in a system designed to crush people like me. Mr. Henderson sat at the mahogany desk buried under a mountain of legal texts. His tie was loosened and his usually pristine hair was a mess. "It is not looking good, Elena," he said, without looking up, his voice heavy with fatigue. "The suspension order is airtight. You admitted to identity fraud on national television. That is an automatic disqualification for holding a medical proxy. The state argues that since the proxy designates you as his medical guardian, based on your nursing credentials, the loss of those credentials invalidates the entire document." He took a sip of lukewarm coffee and grimaced. And that is not the worst part. Richard's legal team filed for an emergency annulment an hour ago. I stopped pacing and turned to him. "Annulment, not divorce." Henderson nodded. "They are arguing that since Elena Rossi does not legally exist, the marriage contract was fraudulent from the start. If the judge grants it, you were never his wife. You are a legal stranger. No marriage means no spousal rights. No license means no medical rights. They are stripping you naked, Elena. By midnight, you will be nothing more than a trespasser in this house again." I walked over to the window and peered through the curtains. A black van was parked just outside the gate. I recognized the logo on the side. It was a private ambulance service owned by a subsidiary of Sterling Corp. They were already here, waiting like vultures for the clock to strike 12 so they could haul Arthur away to some dark hole where he would never speak again. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest, but I forced it down. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed a solution. I went to Arthur. He was in the adjacent room, resting in his wheelchair, watching the news with a grim expression. The chyron on the screen read, "Fraudulent nurse holds billionaire hostage." I knelt beside him. "They are coming for you, Arthur," I whispered, taking his hand. "They found a way to break the proxy. I cannot be your nurse anymore." Arthur looked at me, his eyes fierce and intelligent. He tapped his finger on the armrest of his wheelchair 3 times. It was our signal for tablet. I fetched the device from the safe and placed it in his lap. His movements were slow and jerky, but deliberate. He opened a secure file I had never seen before, titled Protocol Omega. Inside was a list of names, not board members or politicians, but doctors, independent researchers, specialists who operated outside the mainstream hospital system. He scrolled down and stopped at a name highlighted in red, Dr. Vincent Kane. Next to the name was a phone number and a note, "He owes me a life." I looked at Henderson. "Who is Vincent Kane?" Henderson's face went pale. Vincent Kane, the butcher of Baltimore. He was a trauma surgeon who got blacklisted 5 years ago for performing experimental procedures on terminal patients without board approval. He is brilliant, but he is a pariah. And more importantly, he still has his medical license. He operates a private concierge clinic for clients who value discretion over legality. Why would Arthur want him? Because he is the only one Victoria Sterling cannot buy, I realized. I grabbed the phone and dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Make it quick. I am busy." I took a deep breath. "Dr. Kane, this is Elena Sterling. I am calling on behalf of Arthur. He is calling in the debt." There was a long silence on the other end, then a low, humorless laugh. Arthur Sterling. I thought that old shark was a vegetable. He is awake, I said, and he needs a medical director. Tonight. Within 4 hours. Or he dies. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, praying I had not just made a mistake. If Kane was as volatile as Henderson said, he might just sell us out to Richard for a quick payout. But we had no other choice. I turned back to the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The black van outside turned on its headlights. They were getting ready. 2 hours later, the power went out. The lights in the library flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The security monitors went black. Richard. He had cut the power to the estate to flush us out. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to guide Henderson and Arthur into the panic room hidden behind the bookshelf. It was a reinforced steel bunker with its own generator. As the heavy door sealed shut behind us, I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. They were not waiting for midnight. They were breaching the house now. We sat in the dim light of the bunker, the generator humming softly. I checked the time. 11:30. 30 minutes left. Dr. Kane had not arrived. My heart sank. He wasn't coming. We were alone. Henderson was wiping sweat from his forehead. They will find us, he whispered. Richard knows about this room. He built it. Suddenly, the intercom on the wall crackled to life. It was Richard's voice, distorted and triumphant. Elena, I know you are in there. Come out. The police are here to enforce the annulment order. You are trespassing on my property, and the paramedics are here to transport my father. Do not make us cut through the door with a torch. It will get hot in there. I looked at Arthur. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He was ready to accept his fate, but I wasn't. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button. You are the one trespassing, Richard. I said, my voice steady despite the fear gripping my throat. And if you touch that door, I will release the rest of the blackmail files. The ones about your offshore accounts? Richard laughed. Go ahead. Who will believe a fraud? Open the door, Elena. It is over. Then a new sound echoed from the outside. A loud crash followed by the screech of tires on gravel. Not outside the gate, but right in the foyer. Someone had driven a vehicle through the front doors of the mansion. I heard shouting then, the sound of heavy boots on the stairs. Richard's voice on the intercom cut off abruptly. There was a commotion outside the panic room door, a dull thud like a body hitting the floor. Then silence. I backed away from the door, gripping a heavy brass candlestick as a weapon. Henderson cowered in the corner. The wheel of the panic room door began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I raised the candlestick, ready to swing. The heavy steel door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, wearing a black leather jacket over scrubs that were stained with something dark. He had a scar running down his cheek, and eyes that looked like they had seen hell and found it boring. He stepped over the unconscious body of one of Richard's private security guards. He looked at me, then at Arthur. You called? He said, his voice rough like gravel. I lowered the candlestick. Dr. Kane. He nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He slapped it against the steel doorframe. My medical credentials, he said, active and unrestricted. As of 10 minutes ago, I am the new Chief Medical Officer of the Sterling Private Trust, which means I am the only one allowed to touch that patient. Behind him, Richard appeared, his face bleeding from a fresh cut. Who the hell are you? He screamed, signaling for his remaining guards to attack. Kane didn't even turn around. He simply raised a hand holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. One step closer and you get a dose of succinylcholine, he said calmly. It paralyzes the diaphragm. You will suffocate while fully conscious. It is a nasty way to die. The guards froze. Richard hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. You are bluffing, he spat. Kane smiled a cold, terrifying smile. Try me. I have lost my license once before. I am not afraid to lose it again. But you, Richard, are you afraid to lose your life? I stepped forward, moving to stand beside this dangerous stranger. The clock on the wall beeped. Midnight. The deadline had passed, but the game had changed. Richard looked at Kane, then at me, then at the syringe. He realized he was outgunned not by law, but by sheer violence. Get out of my house, he whispered. Not your house, I corrected him. It belongs to the trust now, and Dr. Kane is the administrator, which means you are visiting hours are over. The heavy steel door of the panic room remained open, a gaping mouth in the dim light of the backup generator. Richard Sterling stood in the hallway, his face a mask of impotent rage. He adjusted his cufflinks, regaining his composure with terrifying speed. You have bought yourself a night doctor, he said, his voice echoing in the silent corridor. But you cannot stay in there forever. And when you come out, you will find that this house is no longer a home. It is a siege. He turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps fading into the darkness. A moment later, the hum of the generator faltered, then died. The panic room plunged into pitch blackness. Richard had not just cut the power to the main house, he had severed the fuel line to the emergency backup. We were blind, deaf, and trapped in a steel box. I fumbled for the flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. It landed on Dr. Vincent Kane. He was leaning against the wall, unbothered by the sudden darkness, twirling the syringe between his fingers like a pen. Interesting choice of tactics, he murmured. Siege warfare. Primitive, but effective. He holstered the syringe and walked over to Arthur, shining a penlight into the old man's eyes. Pupil response is sluggish. He needs hydration and his meds. And I need coffee. Real coffee, not this freeze-dried trash. He looked at me, his eyes cold and predatory. Well, Mrs. Sterling, you are the lady of the house. Go get us some supplies. I stared at him, incredulous. Did you not hear him? Richard has likely posted guards at every exit. If I go out there, I get caught. Kane laughed, a dry, raspy sound. I did not say go outside. I said go into the house. Unless you are telling me you have lived here for 3 years and do not know the layout of your own prison better than the jailer. He was testing me. He wanted to see if I was a victim or a survivor. I swallowed my fear. I knew the service corridors, the hidden dumbwaiter shafts that the servants use to move unseen. I nodded. Watch him, I said. If he dies, you do not get paid. Kane smirked. If he dies, I lose my favorite hobby. Go. I slipped out of the panic room, moving like a shadow through the hallways I had once scrubbed on my hands and knees. The mansion was eerie in the silence. I crept to the kitchen, avoiding the main foyer where I could hear the heavy breathing of Richard's security detail. I raided the pantry, filling a pillowcase with bottled water, protein bars, and canned fruit. As I reached for a first aid kit under the sink, my hand brushed against something cold. A wire. I froze. It was a tripwire strung across the cabinet door, connected to a silent alarm. Richard had booby-trapped the food. He wanted us to starve. I carefully stepped over it, retreating with my meager loot. I was not dealing with a scorned husband anymore. I was dealing with a hunter. When I returned to the panic room, Kane was sitting on the floor, dismantling a piece of medical equipment with a pocket knife. He looked at the food I dumped on the floor. Protein bars. Pathetic. But it will keep the old man alive. He tossed a bar to me. Eat. You look like you are about to pass out, and I do not do CPR on frauds. I tore open the wrapper, my hands shaking. Why are you doing this? Kane, I asked. I know about your reputation. The Butcher of Baltimore. You do not help people. You experiment on them. Why, Arthur? Kane stopped working. He looked at Arthur, who was sleeping fitfully in the wheelchair. Because he is the only one who understood the value of sacrifice, he said, his voice losing its mocking edge. 5 years ago, I developed a surgical technique that could save trauma victims with 90% organ failure. The medical board called it unethical. They said the survival rate was too low to justify the risk. They tried to revoke my license and throw me in prison for mutilation. Arthur Sterling paid the judge. He paid the board. He buried the evidence. He bought me my freedom. I felt a chill run down my spine. Arthur had not saved Cain out of kindness. He had saved him because he saw a useful monster. And what was the price, I asked? Cain looked at me, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. The price was that when he called, I would answer. He knew one day his family would turn on him. He knew he would need a monster to fight monsters. He pointed the screwdriver at me. You are just a nurse, Elena. You try to save people with compassion. I save them with necessary violence. That is why I am here. To do the things you are too moral to do. My phone buzzed, breaking the tension. It was Mr. Henderson. I put it on speaker. The signal was weak. Barely 1 bar. Elena, we have a problem. Henderson's voice was distorted by static. Victoria Sterling just filed an emergency injunction in federal court. She is accusing the Sterling Private Trust of being a shell company for money laundering. The judge has frozen all assets pending an investigation. The accounts are locked, Elena. Every cent. We cannot pay Dr. Cain. We cannot even buy a lawyer. I looked at Cain. He had heard every word. His expression did not change, but the air in the room grew suddenly colder. No money, he said softly. That complicates things. I stood up, stepping between him and Arthur. I will find a way to pay you, I said quickly. There is jewelry. There are paintings in the house. I can steal them. We can sell them on the black market. Cain shook his head slowly, standing up and towering over me. I do not want trinkets, Elena, and I do not work on credit. This trust was supposed to fund my research lab for the next 10 years. That was the deal. He walked over to the door and placed his hand on the handle. If there is no money, then the contract is void. I am leaving. And without me, Richard will be in here in 5 minutes. Panic surged through me. If he left, we were dead. Wait, I screamed. I grabbed his arm. It felt like grabbing a steel bar. There is something else. Arthur has a secret vault. The Black Vault. He mentioned it once when he was delirious. He said it holds the collateral for every dirty deal he ever made. It is not money. It is leverage. Pure, concentrated power. If you help us beat Richard, you get the vault. Cain stopped. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then up at my face, searching for a lie. A vault of leverage, he mused. Information is worth more than cash in this city. Where is it? I swallowed hard. I did not know. But I had to lie. I had to buy time. It is. In the wine cellar, I lied. Behind the vintage Bordeaux collection. But it is biometrically locked. Only Arthur can open it. And he can only open it if he is alive and recovering. Cain stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. Then he smiled. A smile that did not reach his eyes. You are a terrible liar, Elena. But I am curious. And I am bored. He released the door handle and walked back to Arthur. Fine. I will stay. But not for the money. I will stay to see how far you are willing to go to survive. He pulled a scalpel from his pocket and tested the edge against his thumb, drawing a thin line of blood. But be warned, if I find out there is no vault, I will take my payment from you. In organs. Suddenly, a loud grinding noise echoed from the ceiling. The ventilation vents. Richard was pumping something in. A thick white gas began to hiss from the grates. Tear gas. He was smoking us out. Cain reacted instantly. He ripped the hem of his shirt off, soaked it in the water I had brought, and tied it around his face. Cover your faces, he roared. He grabbed the wheelchair and kicked the panic room door open. We are moving. Now. We burst out into the hallway coughing and blinded by the gas. The lights were still out, but I could see flashlight beams dancing at the end of the corridor. Richard's guards. They were waiting for us. There were 3 of them wearing gas masks and holding batons. Kane did not hesitate. He shoved the wheelchair toward me. "Get him to the dumbwaiter," he ordered. I pushed Arthur down the hall, my eyes burning, my lungs screaming for air. Behind me, I heard the sickening crunch of bone meeting bone and a scream of pain that did not belong to Kane. I reached the dumbwaiter shaft, a narrow opening in the wall used for laundry. It was small, too small for a wheelchair. I had to take Arthur out. I dragged him from the chair, his dead weight nearly crushing me. I shoved him into the small wooden box. "I will pull you up from the 2nd floor," I whispered. I slammed the door shut and hauled on the pulley ropes, my muscles straining. As the box rose, I turned to look for Kane. He was standing over the 3 guards. 2 were on the floor groaning. The 3rd was pinned against the wall, Kane's scalpel pressed against the man's carotid artery. "Tell Richard," he shouted, his voice muffled by the cloth mask but terrifyingly clear. "Tell him the doctor is making a house call, and I am about to perform surgery on his security team." He looked at me, his eyes wild with adrenaline. "Go upstairs. To the wine cellar. Let's find this vault of yours, and God help you if it is empty." The dusty air of the service corridor tasted like stale fear and old wood as I hauled Arthur out of the dumbwaiter. He was coughing weakly, his face gray in the dim light of Kane's flashlight, but he was alive. Kane did not offer to help. He stood by the cellar door, listening intently to the sounds from the floor above. Heavy boots were thumping on the hardwood, a rhythmic marching that signaled professionals. Richard had escalated. The rent-a-cops were gone, replaced by a tactical team that moved with the precision of a death squad. "We have 3 minutes," Kane whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "Maybe less if they have thermal imaging. Take me to the vault, Elena, or I leave you here for the wolves." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I pushed Arthur's wheelchair toward the heavy oak door of the wine cellar. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of guilt. There was no vault. I had invented it out of thin air, a desperate lie to buy loyalty from a psychopath. I was leading us into a dead end. When we reached the cellar, the air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and cork. Rows of dusty bottles stretching back 50 years lined the stone walls. It was a tomb for expensive grapes, and soon it would be a tomb for us. "Where is it?" Kane demanded, sweeping his flashlight beam across the racks. "Which rack?" I stood frozen in the center of the room. My mind raced, trying to concoct a new lie. Maybe I could say the entrance was hidden under a rug. Maybe I could pretend to forget the combination. I think it is behind the French collection," I stammered, pointing vaguely at the far wall. Kane walked over and shoved a rack of vintage Bordeaux aside. The bottles rattled and clinked, but the wall behind was solid stone. He turned to me, his face twisting into a snarl. "You lied." He took a step toward me, the scalpel appearing in his hand like a magic trick. "You wasted my time. You wasted my life." I stepped back, shielding Arthur with my body. "No, wait," I pleaded. "I just need a moment. It has been a long time." Kane lunged, grabbing me by the throat and pinning me against the cold stone wall. The scalpel pressed against the soft skin under my jaw. "The game is over, Elena," he hissed. "Give me one reason not to carve my payment out of your hide right now." Suddenly, a rhythmic tapping sound echoed in the silent cellar. Tap, tap, tap. Kane froze. We both looked down. Arthur was tapping his ring against the metal armrest of his wheelchair. He was looking past us, staring intensely at a specific bottle on the bottom shelf of the adjacent rack. A dusty bottle of 1945 Romanée Conti. He tapped again, harder this time, urgency in his eyes. Kane released me and walked slowly to the shelf. He looked at Arthur, then at the bottle. He reached out and grasped the neck of the expensive wine. It did not pull out. He twisted it to the left. A loud mechanical clank resonated through the walls like the shifting of tectonic plates. The entire section of the wine rack groaned and swung inward, revealing a steel door embedded in the stone. My jaw dropped. The lie was true. The black vault existed. Arthur had not been delirious. He had been preparing for this war for decades. Kane looked at me, a strange mixture of respect and suspicion on his face. "You are either the best liar in the world or the luckiest," he muttered. He pushed the heavy steel door open. Inside was not a small safe, but a room. A windowless concrete bunker lined with servers' file cabinets and a wall of monitors. It was a command center, ideally suited for a paranoid billionaire who trusted no one. We wheeled Arthur inside just as the sound of the cellar door upstairs being kicked open echoed down the stairs. Voices shouted commands. Clear left, clear right. Contact front. They were here. Kane slammed the vault door shut and spun the heavy locking wheel. Seconds later, a muffled boom shook the door as a breaching charge detonated on the other side. Dust rained down from the ceiling, but the steel held. We were sealed in. Kane ignored the pounding on the door and turned his attention to the room. He walked to a desk and picked up a black binder labeled Leverage. He flipped it open. His eyes widened. "It is all here," he whispered. "Every bribe, every illegal wiretap, every skeleton in every closet in New York." He turned a page and let out a low whistle. "Even mine." He held up a document. It was the original police report from the surgery that ruined his career. The one Arthur had supposedly buried. It wasn't buried. It was archived. Arthur wheeled himself to the main console. He placed his hand on a biometric scanner. The monitors flickered to life, bathing the room in a blue glow. A video feed popped up showing the cellar outside. 5 men in full tactical gear were setting up a shaped charge on the vault door. They were not police. They wore no badges. They were mercenaries, the kind you hired to erase problems permanently. Richard's voice came over the localized intercom system, his tone distorted but smug. "You have nowhere to go, Elena. That door is rated for explosives, but the air vents are not. I am going to pump in carbon monoxide. You will just go to sleep. It will be painless. Much more than you deserve." Kane looked at the monitor, then at the ventilation grate in the corner. He grabbed a roll of duct tape from a shelf and started sealing the vent. "That will buy us an hour," he said. "Maybe 2. But eventually the air will run out. We need a weapon." He looked at the server racks. "Can we upload this data? Can we broadcast it?" Arthur shook his head weakly. He typed a command on the keyboard with one finger. A message appeared on the screen. "System offline, hardline cut." Richard had severed the external cables. We were sitting on a nuclear bomb of information, but we had no way to detonate it. I looked around the room, searching for anything that could help. My eyes landed on a small red box on the wall marked Emergency Protocol. It wasn't a fire alarm. It had a keyhole. I looked at Arthur. He pointed to a chain around his neck, hidden under his shirt. I reached down and pulled it out. A small silver key hung there, warm from his body heat. I took the key and inserted it into the red box. I turned it. A panel slid open, revealing a single red button and a microphone. Kane stopped taping the vent. "What is that?" he asked. I looked at the label under the button. It read, "The Samson option." Arthur typed again. "Cellular override. Emergency broadcast. All frequencies." I realized what it was. It was a short-range, high-frequency transmitter designed to hijack local cell towers. It wouldn't reach the internet, but it would reach every phone within a 5-mile radius, including the phones of the mercenaries outside, including the reporters at the gate, including the police. I picked up the microphone. My hand was shaking, but my voice was steady. "Richard thinks he can suffocate the truth," I said, looking at the camera feed where the mercenaries were drilling into the door. "Let's see how he likes it when the truth suffocates him." Kane grinned, a feral, dangerous smile. He walked over to the shelf of binders. He pulled down 3 of them. One labeled Police Chief, one labeled District Attorney, and one labeled Victoria Sterling. He dropped them on the desk with a heavy thud. "Start reading, Elena," he said. "Make it a good show." I pressed the red button. The on-air light turned crimson. Outside on the monitor, I saw the mercenaries pause. One of them reached for his earpiece confused. Then another pulled out his phone. The signal was hijacking their comms. "This is Elena Sterling." I spoke into the microphone, my voice echoing through every speaker in the Hamptons. "And I am about to read you a bedtime story about how the Sterling family really made their billions." Chapter 1. The Murders. Outside the vault, the drilling stopped. But a new sound began. The hiss of gas. Richard wasn't waiting. He had bypassed the vent and was drilling a hole directly through the wall. A small nozzle poked through, spraying a colorless, odorless mist into the room. Kane saw it. He grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher and smashed it against the nozzle, bending it, but the gas kept hissing. "It is nitrogen," he yelled. "Displaces oxygen. We will pass out in minutes. Read fast, Elena. Read for your life." I started reading from the Victoria Sterling binder. Date: September 12, 1998. Transfer of $3 million to Judge Harold Finch to dismiss manslaughter charges against Richard Sterling. My vision started to blur at the edges. The air felt thin. I gasped for breath but kept reading. Date: October 4th. Payment to arsonist for warehouse fire. Arthur slumped in his chair, his eyes rolling back. He was the weakest. He would go first. Kane was on his knees, coughing violently, trying to tape over the hole with bleeding hands. I felt my knees give way. I slid down the side of the desk, clutching the microphone. "I have to finish," I whispered into the mic. "I have to." The darkness was closing in. The last thing I saw was the monitor showing the mercenaries retreating as police sirens wailed in the distance. They heard me. But was it enough? Or was I just reading my own eulogy? The darkness was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against my chest, making every shallow breath a battle. I could hear the hiss of the nitrogen gas like a snake coiling around my throat, whispering that it was time to sleep forever. My hand was still clutching the cold metal of the microphone, but my fingers were numb, devoid of sensation. Somewhere in the distance beyond the ringing in my ears, I heard a dull, rhythmic thumping. It wasn't my heart. It was louder, mechanical. Then came the screech of metal tearing against metal, a sound so violent it vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. The vault door, which had withstood explosives, was being peeled open like a tin can. A blinding beam of light cut through the gloom, searing my retinas. Men in tactical gear with FBI emblazoned on their chest plates poured into the room. They didn't shout freeze. They shouted medical. A plastic mask was shoved onto my face, forcing pure oxygen into my starving lungs. The world spun violently, then faded into a swirl of red and blue lights. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The air smelled of antiseptic and lemon floor cleaner, a sharp contrast to the dust and gas of the wine cellar. I tried to sit up, but metal clinked against the bed rail. My right wrist was cuffed to the frame. I slumped back, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I was alive, but I was a prisoner. I turned my head. Sitting in the chair next to the bed was Dr. Vincent Kane. He looked worse for wear. His face bruised and a bandage wrapped around his forearm, but he was not handcuffed. He was eating a green apple, slicing pieces off with the same scalpel he had threatened me with earlier. "You are awake?" he said, his voice raspy. "Good. The feds were betting you would have brain damage from the hypoxia. I bet $50 you were too stubborn to die." "Where is Arthur?" I croaked, my throat feeling like I had swallowed broken glass. "Where is Richard?" Kane pointed the scalpel toward the window. "Arthur is in the ICU downstairs. Critical, but stable. The old man is tough." As for Richard, turn on the TV. He tossed me the remote. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, showing an aerial shot of the Sterling estate. Police tape surrounded the property. The Chiron read, Sterling Empire crumbles, CEO arrested after attempted flight. The reporter was standing in front of a federal courthouse. Richard Sterling was apprehended on the tarmac of Teterboro Airport attempting to board a private jet bound for a non-extradition country. He has been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. His mother, Victoria Sterling, has been detained by Interpol in Paris. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. We did it. The broadcast worked. Kane took a bite of his apple. It worked a little too well. You broadcasted federal crimes on an emergency frequency. You hijacked a cell tower. That is terrorism, Elena. Or at least, that is what the prosecutor wanted to call it. But then they listened to the tapes. The audio of Richard ordering the gas attack. The logs of the bribes. Public opinion is a powerful drug. You are not a terrorist. You are a whistleblower. A folk hero. The charges for the broadcast will be dropped. But the fraud, I whispered, looking at the handcuff. I am still Elena Russo. I still faked my license. Kane stopped chewing. He leaned forward, his expression serious for the first time. That is where things get interesting. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. He placed it on the bed. It was a medical intake form from Baltimore General Hospital dated 12 years ago. The patient's name was Frank Russo, my father. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Why do you have this? Kane looked at the floor, then back at me. Because I was the attending surgeon that night. Elena, Arthur Sterling didn't just destroy your father's company. He pushed him to the edge, but when Frank pulled the trigger, he didn't die immediately. Arthur found him. Arthur panicked. He rushed him to my trauma unit. He offered me $10 million to save him. He said he couldn't live with the blood on his hands. I felt the room spin. Arthur had tried to save my father. Kane continued, his voice low. I operated for 14 hours. I used every experimental technique I had, but the damage was too severe. Frank died on my table. Arthur was devastated. He felt he owed a debt to the Russo bloodline. A life for a life. That is why he hired me later when he had his stroke. And that is why he let you into his house. He knew who you were from day one, Elena. He didn't expose you because he wanted you to take it all. He was waiting for you to be strong enough to destroy his wife and son. I closed my eyes, letting the truth wash over me. The man I had hated, the man I thought was a monster, had been my silent guardian. The abuse he took from Richard, the silence. It was all penance. He was protecting the inheritance for me until I could claim it. And the life debt wasn't Kane owing Arthur. It was Arthur owing me. Kane stood up. The district attorney is coming in an hour to offer you a deal. They will drop the identity fraud charges if you agree to testify against Victoria and Richard. You will lose your nursing license permanently, of course, but you will keep the company. You will be the richest woman in New York, and you will be free. The door opened and 2 suits walked in, followed by Mr. Henderson. My lawyer looked exhausted, but he was smiling. Elena, he said, they are offering a plea deal, time served, probation, and full control of the Sterling Trust. But there is a condition. You have to publicly recant the accusation that the police chief was involved in the cover-up. They want to save face. I looked at the suits. They were nervous. They knew I held the rest of the files I hadn't broadcast yet. I looked at Kane. He winked. I looked at Henderson. Then I looked at the handcuff on my wrist. Unlock this, I said, my voice returning to its steel command. I am not signing anything while I am chained like a criminal. The lead agent hesitated, then nodded to the officer outside. The cuff clicked open. I rubbed my wrist. I will testify, I said. I will bury Richard and Victoria, but I am keeping the files on the police chief, as insurance, just in case you boys decide to forget who the real hero is. The agent stiffened but didn't argue. We have a deal, he said stiffly. As they left the room, Henderson collapsed into the chair. You play a dangerous game, Elena. I looked out the window at the city skyline. The Sterling Tower stood tall in the distance. It was mine now. A monument to my father built on the ruins of his enemies. I turned to Kane. One last thing, Doctor. You said Arthur hired you to be a monster to fight monsters. The war is over. What will you do now? Kane tossed the apple core into the trash can with a perfect arc. The war is never over, Elena. Power hates a vacuum. You just took down the king and queen. Now the wolves will come for the territory. You are going to need a monster more than ever. He paused, a dark smile playing on his lips. And besides, I still haven't been paid. I expect my research lab to be fully funded by Monday morning. I smiled back. It was a cold smile, a CEO's smile. You will get your lab, Vincent. But first I have a meeting with my husband. I hear the visitation room at Rikers Island is lovely this time of year. I want to look him in the eye one last time. Not as his nurse, not as his victim, but as the woman who owns the cage he lives in. The iron gates of Rikers Island slammed shut behind me with a finality that sounded like the crack of a whip. The air inside the visitation center smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of despair. It was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the Sterling estate, but in a way it felt more honest. Here everyone knew they were in a cage. In the Hamptons, the cages were just made of gold and lies. I sat on the metal stool on the visitor's side of the reinforced glass partition. I smoothed the skirt of my black tailored suit. It was not morning black. It was the black of a judge's robe. I checked my watch, a diamond-encrusted timepiece that used to belong to Victoria Sterling. It was 10 o'clock. Richard was late. A door buzzed on the other side of the glass. 2 correction officers escorted a man into the room. It took me a moment to recognize him. Richard Sterling, the man who had worn $3,000 suits and sneered at waiters, now wore a shapeless orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was shaved close to his scalp, exposing the pale skin beneath. His face was gaunt, his eyes darting around the room with the nervous energy of a prey animal. When he saw me, he froze. A flicker of hope ignited in his dull eyes. He rushed to the stool and grabbed the phone receiver. Elena. He breathed, his voice cracking through the static of the line. Oh God, Elena. You came. I knew you would come. You have to get me out of here. This place. They are animals. I have not slept in 3 days. He pressed his hand against the glass, leaving a greasy smear. Talk to Henderson. Tell him to liquidate my portfolio. I can pay the bail. I just need access to the accounts. Please, baby. I know I made mistakes, but we are family. We can fix this. I picked up the receiver, slowly holding it a few inches from my ear. I did not speak immediately. I just looked at him. I looked at the man who had kicked me when I was down, the man who had ordered my death, the man who had tried to murder his own father for a trust fund. I studied him like a scientist studying a bacteria under a microscope. I am afraid that is impossible, Richard. I said, my voice calm and devoid of warmth. You do not have a portfolio anymore. The board voted this morning. They invoked the morality clause in your contract. Your shares have been seized to pay for the damages caused by your fraud. You are bankrupt, Richard. You have $0 to your name. Richard's face crumbled. The hope vanished, replaced by a dawn of horror. No, that cannot be legal. My mother, she will fix it. She has money in Zurich. I laughed softly. Your mother is currently fighting extradition in a French holding cell. Her assets are frozen by Interpol. She cannot even buy herself a better lawyer, let alone bail you out. You are alone, Richard. Completely and utterly alone. He slammed his fist against the glass, a weak, ineffectual gesture. You bitch. You stole everything. You are a fraud, a fake nurse, a liar. Who do you think you are, coming here to gloat? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. I am the woman who owns the roof over your head, I replied. Did you not know? The Sterling Trust just acquired the private prison contractor that manages this facility. Technically, Richard, I am your landlord, and I am here to inspect my property. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The realization of the power dynamic shift hit him like a physical blow. He slumped on the stool, defeated. Why, he whispered. Why didn't you just leave? Why did you have to destroy us? Because you didn't just hurt me, Richard, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You tried to erase my father, and then you tried to erase yours. I reached into my purse and pulled out a photo. It was a picture of Arthur sitting in his wheelchair in the garden, bathed in sunlight. I pressed it against the glass. Arthur wanted you to know something. He wanted you to know that for 3 years he heard every word you said to him, every insult, every threat. He was awake, Richard, and he hated you. Not because you were greedy, but because you were weak. Richard recoiled from the photo as if it were toxic. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I stood up. I had seen what I needed to see. The monster was just a man, and a small one at that. Goodbye, Richard, I said, placing the receiver back on the hook. Enjoy your stay. I hear the food is terrible. I turned and walked away, the sound of him screaming my name muffled by the thick glass fading into the background noise of the prison. I did not look back. 1 year later, the view from the top floor of the Sterling Tower was breathtaking. Manhattan lay spread out below a grid of light and ambition. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, swirling a glass of sparkling water. The office behind me was buzzing with quiet efficiency. The decor had changed. The heavy dark wood and leather of the old regime were gone, replaced by sleek glass and modern art. It was brighter, sharper. Dr. Vincent Kane walked in without knocking. He was wearing a lab coat over his black t-shirt, looking as dangerous and out of place as ever in a corporate boardroom. He tossed a file onto my desk. The FDA approval just came through, he said. The regenerative trauma protocol is live. We start clinical trials next month. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. You did it, Elena. You turned a crime family into a medical pioneer. Your father would be proud. I touched the file, thinking of Frank Russo. The debt was paid. His name was cleared, and his technology was finally saving lives instead of destroying them. And Arthur, I asked, how is he today? Kane's expression softened slightly. He is fading, Elena. The stroke damage was extensive. He has maybe a week left, but he is at peace. He is sitting in the garden listening to opera. He asked for you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I would go to him tonight. I would hold the hand of the man who had been my enemy, my protector, and my father figure all in one. We would watch the sunset together one last time. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Mr. Henderson is here for the board meeting, Mrs. Sterling, and the press is waiting in the lobby for your statement on the acquisition of Vance Media. I smiled. Jessica Vance's company. I was buying it for pennies on the dollar after she went to prison for embezzlement. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Send them in, I said. I buttoned my jacket and checked my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me was not the scared nurse who had hidden in a panic room. She was not the victim of a billionaire heir. She was Elena Sterling, the Iron Lady of New York. I had walked through hell, and I had come out owning the place. I turned to Kane. Are you ready, doctor? The wolves are waiting. Kane pulled a scalpel from his pocket and twirled it dexterously, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Let them come, Elena. We are the ones with the teeth now. I walked toward the double doors, my heels clicking a rhythm of power on the polished floor. The game was over. The reign had begun, and this time the crown was not inherited. It was conquered.